Lisa Tucker will be giving a presentation on food for thought, kind of making the connection between food and the poverty picture and hunger. Lisa is the executive director and founder of the Field and Fork Network, former publisher of the Edible Buffalo magazine. She's also an environmental educator.
It's Ag, Economic Development, Food System Educator.
Okay, for Cornell Cooperative Extension of Niagara County, which is kind of our local county extension. So Lisa's going to go through some stuff. She has said that she has a lot of definitions and information that we will be able to email out and post to the website as well. So the website, if you don't know it, niagara.edu/contribution. So, Lisa?
Okay. Can everybody hear me, or would you prefer I use the microphone?
I can hear you.
Everybody hear me? Back there, you can hear me? Awesome. So as Tom mentioned, there's going to be a lot of information kind of packed into this presentation today, but I'm going to give my PowerPoint to the group that's running the competition, so you can refer back to it. Obviously, they're videotaping what I'm going to talk about today. Before I get started, how many of you back up your computers? Only random. Okay. I just went through a nightmare in the last 24 hours. I had to redo this presentation from up here this morning because I had to scale with my Mac. So I just want to make sure everybody backs up their information. So we're going to talk about some of the challenges of food access specific to impoverished communities. This is just kind of an overview of what we're going to talk about. So I'm going to go through some terminology that you should be familiar with and understanding the difference between the different terms. Sometimes some of the terms, and you'll see what I'm talking about in a minute, kind of get confused with one another. I'm going to give a quick overview of the food system because I think it's really important as you try to address some of the issues that you're faced with, that understanding how the food system works is important. I'm going to talk specifically on some research and national trends about the built environment when it comes to food access. And I'm using terms right now that I'm going to define in a second. Then I'm going to give you just kind of an overview of what's going on in the city of Niagara Falls in terms of poverty and food access. And then I'm going to give you some things to think about as you start to come up with your brilliant, innovative, and successful solutions to address some of these issues. And then there'll be time for questions at the end of that. Okay? So some of the terminology that I wanted to just define for you today. The first is healthy food, and I know you're probably thinking, well, I know what healthy food is. And in the context of this discussion, though, I want to be really clear and specific about what I'm talking about when I say healthy food and access to healthy food. What I specifically mean is healthy food is being access to fresh, whole fruits and vegetables and any other foods high in nutrition, okay? The next term is food access. Can somebody tell me what food access is or means? Maybe go ahead.
You're close enough to walk to a grocery store, or you have reasonable transportation to get yourself there.
Okay, yeah, having sufficient resources to obtain appropriate foods for a nutritious diet. That's perfect. The next is food security or insecurity. Food security basically encompasses the availability of food, the access to food, and the use of food. In other words, appropriate use based on knowledge of basic nutrition. Okay? A food desert, and there are several areas of the city of Niagara Falls are considered food deserts, are defined as urban neighborhoods and rural towns without ready access to fresh, healthy, and affordable food. And the key word there too is affordable. Food justice. Does anyone know the definition for food justice? This is kind of one that sometimes gets caught up and entangled with the definition of food access. Food justice is when communities exercise their right to grow, sell, and eat healthy food. Healthy food is fresh, nutritious, affordable, culturally appropriate, and grown locally with care for the well-being of the land, workers, and animals. So it looks at the whole system. Okay? The last term, and I just used it a moment ago, is built environment. And when I say built environment, by definition, it's the human-made space in which people live, work, and play on a day-to-day basis. In this discussion, it's about physical structures that retail food, so grocery stores, markets, things like that. So that's what I'm referring to when I say built environment. So this is probably one of the best graphics that I've found that demonstrates a community-based food system. So you'll see in the center is community-based food system. And then the next layer, all the way around it, are your typical things that you hear about in a food system, right? You're growing food, you're processing food, you're preparing food, you're eating food, you're selling food, you're distributing food, and you're doing waste disposal, you're throwing food away, okay? But the reason why I like this graphic is that it layers on all the other things that you don't really think about when you're considering the food system. These are obviously the most basic and important components of the food system, but the other things to consider are food security, which is what we're talking about today, farm viability. If the farms don't make money, they can't exist, they go away. Environmental stewardship, which talks more about the care, taking of land and the environment as a whole. Economic development, jobs, community viability, and farmland protection. And then the extra layer outside of that is government, technical service providers, educators, funders, trade associations, community advocates, and that's that support system around the food system. Okay? So being familiar with this will help inform as you think about ways to repair some of the challenges that are going on in Niagara Falls food system. So what we're talking about today is really more about trends that kind of, I guess, are happening more on a national scale. And there's a great report called, I have it written down here, it's called The Grocery Gap, Who Has Access to Healthy Foods and Why It Matters. And the reason why it's a great report, it's actually an aggregate of a ton of research that's been done over the course of the last probably 5-10 years. So that's kind of nice to have a one-stop shop for some of this research. But the nice thing about the report too is that it really hits on top lines what the major findings are based on the different reports that it pulled from. And that's what these are right here. So the first one is accessing healthy food is a challenge for many Americans, particularly those living in low-income neighborhoods, communities of color, and in rural areas. And I know your focus for your competition is predominantly Niagara Falls, right? That's it. So you're really looking at the urban environment, but I want to make sure that you also understand that a lot of these things that we're talking about today also apply in rural communities as well. So the first one, accessing healthy food in terms of low-income neighborhoods and communities of color. Just to give you an example, the USDA did a 2009 study and found that 23.5 million people lack access to a supermarket within a mile from their home. And remember, we just talked earlier, the young lady just said that access is really having reasonable access, close proximity to a market that serves fresh, healthy food. Another study found that low-income census tracts had half as many supermarkets as wealthy tracts. So again, identifying that you're not going to find a lot of grocery stores in low-income areas, right? You're going to, because a lot of them are, most of them are private businesses. They're going to be located in wealthier areas. Another study found that only 8% of African Americans live in a tract with a supermarket compared to 31% of whites. So that's a big disparity right there. And again, identifying that in low-income neighborhoods and in particular communities of color that there is limited or low access. And then 20% of rural food desert communities have residents who live more than 10 miles from a supermarket. So again, just juxtaposing the urban versus the rural, that there are challenges on the rural side as well. The other thing that's noted is lack of healthy, high-quality foods in nearby stores. So while there may be a lack of grocery stores, you'll see a convenience store, a corner store, but again, are they selling fresh, healthy food? Probably not. So while there may be a lot of stores in close proximity, it's what they're selling. One study found in Albany, New York, for instance, 80% of non-white residents cannot find low-fat milk or high-fiber bread in their neighborhoods. That's pretty high. As I just mentioned about the corner stores, there's usually a predominance of corner convenience or liquor stores within low-income communities. And nationally, low-income zip codes have 30% more convenience stores, which tend to lack healthy items than middle-income zip codes. Okay? And then a biggie that gets talked a lot about, particularly up in this area, is lack of transportation. Being able, if you don't own a car, being able to have public transportation access to a store that sells fresh, healthy food. Okay. The next one is better access corresponds with healthier eating. That's kind of stating the obvious, right? For example, in New Orleans, they did a study on small neighborhood stores that found that each additional meter of shelf space devoted to fresh vegetables, residents around that area ate an additional 0.35 servings per day. So again, correlating that access with healthy eating. If it's there, we'll eat it. The next one, access to healthy food is associated with lower risk for obesity and other diet-related chronic diseases. Researchers find that residents who live near supermarkets or in areas where food markets selling fresh produce outnumber food stores that generally do not, such as corner stores, have lower rates of diet-related diseases than their counterparts in neighborhoods lacking food access. So obviously diets and health are being influenced by the foods that are available in your neighborhood. So those are just some of the national trends to keep in mind as you drill down. Now we're just going to take a quick look at Niagara Falls. So a lot of the statistics that I'm quoting here are actually from a mobile safety net report that was published last year, I believe, and it's available online. A couple different agencies, they surveyed over 359 households in the city of Niagara Falls to come up with some of these actually very alarming statistics. So the population of Niagara Falls is around 50,000. Is it lower than that now? It is lower, just dipped a little bit lower. So 50,000 people, right? 22% of the population live on incomes under the federal poverty level. That is staggering compared to how small the population is, and to have 22%. That's roughly 11,000 people, okay, or households, I should say. 1 in 7 has urgent needs for food. 15% of the city's most vulnerable populations have urgent concerns for food. The resounding issue with Niagara Falls residents having food access is not having enough money to buy food. Okay, so income is a big issue. So as you think about ways to address some of these issues, you have to think about affordability of access. Okay. Another staggering number is that 70% of the city's population are dependent on food stamps. So food stamps, the name that you probably will see or come across when referring to food stamps is called SNAP benefits. SNAP stands for Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. That's just another long way to say food stamps. That's also an incredibly alarming number. And I threw in these two statistics, just again, things to think about. There is only one traditional grocery store within the city limits of Niagara Falls. Now, some could argue Wegmans is part of that, but Wegmans is actually considered more of the town of Niagara, where it's located out on Military Road. Within the city limits, there's only one traditional grocery store, and that's Tops. So you're talking about a city with 50,000 residents and one grocery store. Okay. The other thing I wanted to throw up there was how many farmers markets currently exist in Niagara Falls, and that is 2. There's one on Pine Avenue, and there's one at Park Place just outside the Renew offices. Okay. So what I just talked about and things that you need to consider in terms of coming up with solutions to address some of these issues. Obviously, quality of food and the price of produce and any other nutritious food options are important, because when you're dealing in impoverished communities, you're dealing with obviously people with limited means or no means. So outside the food pantry, you need to consider affordability. Obviously, transportation is key, having the accessibility in terms of walking distance, public transport, or if they do have a car. This is a biggie that sometimes gets lost in the mix. It's cultural appropriateness of neighborhood food choices. I'm not as familiar with Niagara Falls in terms of its immigrant populations, but down in Buffalo, how many people are familiar with the Broadway Market? Okay. So what do you know the Broadway Market for?
Polish food,
Yeah.
Brody's.
Right. Polish food. Yeah, if you walk around the market, if you look at that neighborhood, it's Middle Eastern, it's a whole different ethnic makeup than what it was years ago when it first was in its heyday. And they're struggling with that to figure out how can the market serve its community and also, kind of hold on to that legacy from the past. So I use it as an example. Obviously the Broadway Market, it's more of a tradition and historic landmark too in the city of Buffalo, but knowing your audience in terms of the foods that they want to eat is really important, okay, and the foods that they're looking for. The other thing is education. You just automatically assume people know what nutritious food is. Not necessarily, they didn't grow up with it. If they're not exposed to it in their school environment or in other ways, that's a big hurdle that you have to consider when you're coming up with your solutions. So there's the nutrition aspect, knowing what nutritious food is, and also preparation of food, teaching people how to cook, how to buy healthy foods on a budget, things like that. That's all built in with the education piece, and you can't not address that at some point. So I wanted to also touch on all of these. There's a great report, and I'll make sure that you guys get a link to it. It's called Innovations in Local Food Enterprise, Fresh Ideas for a Just and Profitable Food System. And this is case study after case study after case study of innovative, solution-based examples of food access businesses that were created and programs to address some of the similar challenges that you're being tasked with addressing in Niagara Falls. It was published through the Wallace Center. I'll send you a copy of it. But it's great as you think about what you guys want to do. So I'm giving this to you. These are excellent points to think about as you come up with your ideas. The first is needs-driven and consumer-based. So that touches on, okay, people need access to food, right? Healthy food. Consumer-based, meaning you need to bring them the food that they want in terms of healthy food. If you're dealing with certain ethnic communities or, just understanding the cultural differences out there. You want to focus on non-conventional forms of social enterprise, and that's where this report that I just referred to is a great resource. So you can kind of see some of the ways that they've creatively come up with successful solutions. Location specific. You need to know, what neighborhood or the city or the area that you want to focus on. I strongly recommend you build on existing assets, so know what's out there. How many people know that there are, actually let me reverse this question. Does anyone know how many farms exist in Niagara County? A lot. So guess. Higher.
51.
Higher. Lower. So according to the last ag census, so they do a census of agriculture every 5 years. So this is data from 2012 that was just published. There's 763 farms in Niagara County. So you've got Niagara Falls, a city of approximately 50,000 people, high poverty, a lot of food access challenges, and then you've got 763 farms that exist in our rural communities. So when I slapped up that slide earlier about the food system, you can think about that. How do we connect the urban and the rural? in terms of food access solutions. Emphasis on selling to underserved communities, that's kind of a no-brainer. We're talking about impoverished communities. And then informed by innovation and experiences from around the country. And again, there's other examples out there, but this is a great place to start if you're really interested in looking at different case studies, successful case studies that exist out there. Okay? And just last but not least, food access solutions need to reach beyond physical access to healthy